I just want to kind of show you all how the sausage of faith gets made. Or at least argued for. I see two problems with what you just did, and perhaps you're aware of them. One is that Maimonides actually said that this could not be understood allegorically or in any other way, but literally he came back 25 years later after he had been misunderstood in the Guide to the Perplexed and wrote, I think in his commentary to the Mishnah, that the resurrection is a literal truth, has to be believed in. There may be some caveats there in his theology, but he was talking about bodies being reanimated. The other issue is you made this sort of artful move to the free will loophole. You said people have free will. If a man wants to lock his daughter in a dungeon and have sex with her, God has allowed that because he's given us this rather diabolical freedom. That doesn't cover all of the other suffering for which only God can be responsible if he exists. The 9 million children I just talked about dying every year through cancers and violence and accidents and lack of access to clean water. And this is God's fault if God exists. I mean, either he can do nothing about this, or he doesn't care to. So either he's impotent or evil. I mean, this is the problem that the free will doesn't get you out. Another problem with religious moderation is that it is theologically bankrupt. It is not like if we just read the books more closely, we would discover all these reasons to be moderates. I got news for you. I've read the books. God is not a moderate. What you find in these books, there's no place in the books where God says, when you get to the New World and you develop your 3 branches of government and you have a civil society, you can just jettison all the barbarism I recommended in the first books. These books really are engines of fundamentalism. They are engines of intolerance. There really is a wrathful Jesus in the New Testament waiting to be found in 2 Thessalonians and in Revelation, where exactly the Jesus who we have in the Left Behind series of novels that 60 million people have bought. The Jesus of just fiery wrath who's going to throw people into the pit. Okay, that is there to be discovered. Nowhere in the book does it say, well, that's bogus. It's not an accident that people like St. Thomas Aquinas or St. Augustine, really the people who are still taught as the great lights of the Western tradition. In Aquinas' case, he thought heretics should be killed outright. In Augustine's case, he thought they should be tortured. Augustine's argument for the use of torture laid the foundations for the Inquisition. This is not an accident, and it's perfectly reasonable. We have this idea that the fact that we were burning heretics alive for 5 centuries in Europe, this represented some kind of departure, a civilizational departure into psychopathology. It didn't. It is perfectly reasonable to do this if you believe the books. I mean, the heretic next door, given certain beliefs, is far more dangerous than the child molester next door. The heretic can say something to your child that will damn his soul for all time. Religious moderates lose touch with the fact that it's possible to believe this. And finally, the problem with religious moderation is that because it is constitutive of merely our relaxing our hold upon these ancient superstitions and taboos, because it doesn't call the basic project of affiliating yourself with these traditions into question. It doesn't call into question the project of venerating these books to the exclusion of any other books. Because it doesn't, it prevents us from developing modern 21st century alternatives, really bringing the full measure of our creativity to bear on questions of human happiness. Now, this link between religion and morality that really is everywhere in our culture, and which really underwrites religious moderation and religious fundamentalism to a significant degree. This idea that without religion, something fundamental would be lost to us in moral terms. This really is questionable when you look at the books. The truth is that not even, just to speak specifically of the Bible for a moment, not even an Orthodox Jew or a fundamentalist Christian can take God at his word, given how sadistic God is in books like Leviticus and Deuteronomy and Exodus. I mean, if you were going to draw your to-do list out of a book like Leviticus, you would make Mullah Omar of the Taliban look like Franklin Delano Roosevelt. I mean, it's just, it paints a vision of life so needlessly horrible, so subversive of the basic project of creating a sustainable society where human happiness is even possible, that we effectively have edited the Bible. Even fundamentalists have. But it's important to point out that nobody ever says these passages are immoral. I mean, the idea that you find that a woman is not a virgin on her wedding night and you stone her to death. You stone homosexuals to death. If your kids talk back to you, you stone them to death. If you go into a town and you see someone praying to a foreign god, you kill him, you kill his family, you kill everyone in the town. Okay, these are not metaphors. These are not analogies for some spiritual struggle within. These are explicit directives to kill people for theological crimes. No one ever says this is immoral. Christians just say we don't have to do this anymore because Jesus brought us the doctrine of grace. Well, incidentally, Jesus also said that every jot and every tittle of the law has to be fulfilled. So the inquisitors of the Middle Ages had a rationale for practicing this kind of law. And I can assure you that St. Augustine and St. Thomas Aquinas had read the Sermon on the Mount. They managed to square the ministry of Jesus with their impulses to kill people for thought crimes.
Concerned Women of America. I've looked up, for America, I do beg your pardon. I've looked up some of the things you're concerned about, and one of them is something I'm very concerned about too, which is Darwin and evolution. But why are you concerned about evolution?
Yes, well, what a person believes about how human beings were created shapes what they believe about human beings. That if we believe that human beings were created out of love, that is, by a loving creator, and has given each one of us not only a material body, but a spirit and a soul, we then are more likely to treat other people with respect and dignity.
Yes, but you have to contend with facts, don't you? And, I mean, if evolution is a scientific fact, you might as well be concerned about gravity or the Milky Way, mightn't you?
Yes. Well, there's been an effort within the scientific community to censor out information against evolution that proves that evolution may not be as many scientists believe. There have been many times in which evidence that was brought forward to bolster the idea of evolution turned out to be fraudulent.
What's an example of that?
So what we argue for is to teach the controversy. Don't censor out the facts that go against evolution, such as the famous pig's tooth, the tooth that was claimed to be an example of a prehistoric man and turned out to just be the tooth of a pig. There are numerous examples like that. So teach the controversy rather than try and censor out the information that shows that evolution is questionable.
Seriously, there isn't a controversy. There may be a controversy within evolution about certain details, but the fact of evolution is uncontroversial. I mean, whether you like it or not, we're cousins of chimpanzees, we're slightly more distant cousins of monkeys, etc. I mean, pig's teeth are really irrelevant. Of course you can dig up mistakes and even outright fraud. I mean, the Piltdown hoax was an outright fraud. But that was never used as evidence for evolution. It was just a particular case of somebody in the 1920s who fraudulently made up a fossil.
There's no evidence of evolution from one species to another. There's microevolution within a species, but not going from one species to another.
Oh, really?
And actually, you're the way you have framed this and your very closed-mindedness really is a very good example of the kind of censorship we see within the scientific community that won't even allow discussion about the controversy, that says that we can't even discuss any evidence that might show that evolution is questionable.
Where did you study science?
Well, see, that's the point. Scientists are now claiming that they're the only ones that can speak on this issue. And yet when people who look at the evidence go to the Smithsonian Museum on Natural History, and when we look for where's the evidence to show evolution from one species to another, all we find are drawings, illustrations. There aren't the actual material evidence showing it. So while there are attempts to say that only scientists can speak on this, what we have are scientists that are then creating an isolated community and saying that we're the ones, it's almost like a religion in which only scientists are allowed to speak and teach on it and to teach everyone else. Everyone else must believe what the scientists, what particular scientists say, but the scientists who question evolution are being censored out, are being blackballed out of the scientific community and being told that the rest of the world cannot listen to them.
Yeah. I mean, the evidence is actually rather substantial. It's not just fossils, you know. I mean, it's DNA. Presumably you're not concerned about DNA. You accept the existence of DNA, do you?
I think DNA helps to prove that each person is an individual created and as distinct from one another.
If you look at the DNA of all animals and all plants, what you find is a beautifully arranged hierarchy. You find that our DNA is close to chimpanzees, slightly more distant from monkeys, slightly more distant still from rats, slightly more distant still from lizards. The whole thing falls into a beautiful hierarchical pattern, just like a family tree. It is a family tree. How would you explain that?
What I go back to is the evolutionists are still lacking the science to back it up. But instead what happens is science that doesn't bolster the case for evolution gets censored out, such as there is no evidence of evolution from going from one species to another species. If evolution had occurred, then surely, whether it's going from birds to mammals or even beyond that, surely there'd be at least one evidence.
Massive amount of evidence. I'm sorry, but you people keep repeating that like a kind of mantra because you just listen to each other. I mean, if only you would just open your eyes and look at the evidence.
Show it to me. Show me the bones. Show me the carcass. Show me the evidence of the in-between stage from one species to another.
Every time a fossil is found which is in between one species and another, you guys say, now we've got two gaps where previously there was only one. I mean, almost every fossil you find is intermediate with something and something else.
If that were the case, the Smithsonian Natural History Museum would be filled with these examples, but instead they're not.
It is. When we talk about intermediates between species, we're of course not talking about intermediates between modern species. We're not talking about intermediates between dogs and cats. We're talking about intermediates between ancestral dogs and slightly more recent ancestral dogs. Now, in the case of humans, since Darwin's time, there's now enormous amount of evidence about intermediates in human fossils, and we've got various species of Australopithecus, for example, and these are, I mean, some Australopithecus are intermediate between others and ourselves. Then you've got Homo habilis, Homo erectus. These are intermediate between Australopithecus, which was an older species, and Homo sapiens, which is a younger species. I mean, why don't you see those as intermediates?
Evolutionists bear the burden of providing the evidence for those of us who are not scientists to see it. And if the evolutionists had the actual evidence, then it would be displayed in museums, not just in illustrations.
No, I mean,
so what I go back to, though, I think there is a bit of there could be a hidden agenda on the part of those in favor of Darwin. In Darwin's own words, in which he claimed that there was a difference among the races. And that was then used to promote racism.
Yeah, that's Victorian. Everybody in Victorian
That
times
is the
was racist.
Foundation, though. Those who are in favor of evolution often refer back to Darwin. And he is quite a hero of the evolutionist movement.
He is a hero, but not with respect to racism. Now, I just told you about Australopithecus, Homo habilis, Homo erectus, Homo sapiens. By the way, archaic Homo sapiens and then modern Homo sapiens. That's a beautiful series of intermediates.
You're still lacking the material evidence.
The material evidence is there. Go to the museum and look at it.
So what I go back to again is let's look at what evolution and Darwinism has spawned. Let's look at the philosophies that have come out of it that have been so horrific to our world. So we need to look at the philosophies behind and that have grown out of evolution. And what we find are the societies that are the most loving and caring, the societies that are the most well-functioning, are the ones that have a great respect for human beings, for others, because they recognize that each human being was created individually and is distinct from one another. Interesting enough, regarding that, you mentioned how the DNA is common among various species. But among human beings, each one of us has distinct DNA. In fact, that's the one. That's one thing that's quite a way that. Sorry, back up. That's one thing that scientists will use to determine who has committed a crime, is basing it on the DNA evidence. So even DNA helps to show that each human being was created individually.
DNA shows that each human being evolved individually. And of course there are individual differences between human beings, genetic differences, otherwise natural selection couldn't happen. Now I presented you with, I don't have them here obviously, but you can go to any museum and you can see Australopithecus, you can see Homo habilis, you can see Homo erectus, you can see archaic Homo sapiens and modern Homo sapiens. A beautiful series of intermediates. Why do you keep saying present me with the evidence when I've done so? Go to the museum and look.
I have gone to the museums, and so have so many of us who still are not convinced.
Have you seen Homo erectus?
And I think that this effort, this rather aggressive effort to try and talk over us and to censor us, seems to come out of a frustration that so many people still don't believe in evolution. Now, if evolutionists were so confident in their beliefs, there wouldn't be the effort to censor out information that shows that evolution is still lacking and is questionable.
I confess to being frustrated. It's not about suppression, it's about the fact that I have told you about 4 or 5 fossils and you seem to simply be ignoring what I'm saying. Why don't you go and look at those fossils?
And certainly, if they were in the museums, which I've been to many times, then I would look at them objectively. But what I go back to is that the philosophy of evolution has led to ideologies that have been so destructive to the human race.
It's been misunderstood. I mean, even Hitler could be described as a misunderstanding of Darwinism, and that's a grotesque and horrible misunderstanding. And eugenicists,
and those in favor of euthanasia, and those in favor of infanticide.
Yes. But wouldn't it be a good idea, instead of pointing to misperceptions of Darwinism, which have been hideously misused politically, if you try to understand Darwinism, then you'd be in a position to counteract these horrible misunderstandings.
Actually, we are oftentimes forced by the aggressiveness of those who favor evolution. It's not as if we are hidden from this information that you keep presenting. It's not as if it's unknown to us, because we can't get away from it. It's pushed on us all the time. But I think your frustration comes from the fact that so many of us who have seen your information still don't buy into your ideology.
Have you seen Homo erectus? Have you seen Homo habilis? Have you seen Australopithecus?
What I've seen is that in the museums and in the textbooks, that whenever they claim to show the evolution from one species to another, it relies on illustrations and drawings,
no, it doesn't.
not any material evidence.
You might have to go to the Nairobi Museum to see the original fossils, but you can see casts of fossils, exact copies of these fossils, in any major museum.
Well, let me ask you, why are you so aggressive? Why is it that why is it so important to you that everyone believe like you believe?
Well, I'm not talking about belief. I'm talking about facts. I'm talking about I've told you about certain fossils, and every time I ask you about them, you evade the question and you turn to something else.
Well, I can say, even if, again, I say that you can name a few of those, but they still don't show. They still don't prove evolution from the slime to the intricate human body
Well,
there should be, if we had gone from that broad of an evolution, there should be overwhelming tons of material evidence, not just an isolated thing here and there. But again, there is not evidence.
I happened to pick human hominid fossils because I thought you'd be most interested in them. But you can find similar fossils from any vertebrate group you care to name. Of course, there are
But
lots
I guess I go back to, why is it so important to you that everyone believe in evolution? Why do you seem to almost feel like it's dangerous for people to believe that human beings were created individually and with a distinctness and created by a creator?
Well,
why is that?
I don't like the word belief. I prefer to just ask people to look at the evidence, and I'm asking you to look at the evidence.
Well, and I'm asking you, why does it seem so dangerous to you? Why is it so important to you that people not believe in a creator?
No, that's not the point. I mean, the point is that as a scientist, I'm concerned that children in American schools and in schools elsewhere should be exposed to the evidence and allowed to make up their minds about the evidence.
And we completely agree. In fact, that's why the challenge in America, whenever this debate comes up, is teach the controversy, teach the evidence. Because as it is now, in many cases, school children are only being taught about evolution. They're not being taught about the frauds in evolution and the lack of evidence in evolution. So it's actually us who are arguing for teaching all the evidence, not just the ones that are favorable to evolutionists.
Well, you could say which controversy. I mean, there are, of course, other creation stories than Genesis. Do you believe that the world is young, for example? Do you believe the world is less than 10,000 years old?
Well, I believe that God created the world, and the time frame, it can be unknown. As we look in the Bible, it's hard to know what a day, the length of time that might mean in that context. So what I go back to, though, is the human being, because that's like what I think we really care about, are human beings. And are human beings created through the loving touch of a creator, or just came out of slime?
Well, if you were to talk to a bishop, the bishop would probably say, yes, human beings were created by a loving creator, but he used evolution in order to do it. I mean, that would be the position of the Archbishop of Canterbury.
And that does show that there's a variety of opinions across the board among those who may not buy completely into the hardcore ideas of evolution. There are those who believe in different levels of evolution within creation, and that really shows kind of a creative independence within our movement that seems to be a bit lacking among those who believe in evolution and only evolution.
But as I've just told you, there are bishops who believe in evolution. Indeed, just about all bishops believe in evolution. And they would say
you would have to clarify what denomination of bishops,
okay,
to say
well,
a broad
let's say,
term like that.
But the ones I'm familiar with are Anglican and Catholic.
So briefly, the first fruit of this dialogue really is the insight that positive human emotions, positive human traits, are skills. They are trainable. I mean, just as you can learn to play the piano, you can learn to feel compassion for somebody when you otherwise wouldn't. You can learn to feel joy at the success of another person rather than envy. And you can learn this because our brains are really plastic. Our brains are instruments that change based on how they are played. It's really quite magical that this is so, but it certainly seems to be so. Who knows to what degree our experience can change the brain and therefore change the possibilities of future experience. But we know that it does. And therefore, what you think matters. What you feel matters. How the kinds of intentions you form toward other people matters. Whether you act ethically matters. And what you pay attention to, moment to moment, what you notice matters. And it even just matters for health. We know that stress is so corrosive of physical health now. We know that even if meditation did nothing other than reduce stress, it would be worth looking into. And we know that the brain is intimately linked with it, obviously the autonomic nervous system, but the endocrine system, the immune system. These systems are affected by your conscious emotional life and in turn affect the brain, its physical structure. But there's a deeper message from our contemplative traditions beyond that we can change our minds. The message is that there's something beyond the search for pleasure and pain. There's something beyond joy and sorrow and just the vicissitudes of human experience. And what is beyond is not some distant paradise. It is simply consciousness itself. There is this insight that consciousness, that very thing that is aware of your experience in this moment, the very thing that is hearing the sound of my voice, that is feeling the sensation of your body sitting there, that transcends its content in some basic sense. That which is aware of joy, for instance, and that which is aware of sorrow, is not actually improved by joy or diminished by sorrow. And what meditation is a way of just turning consciousness upon itself to try to glimpse this fact and to glimpse the way it feels. Because it doesn't feel like a self. It doesn't feel like I. We all walk around feeling like we are the thinker of our thoughts and the experiencer of our experience. We feel like we are having experience. We're not merely identical to our experience. And this point of view is really vulnerable to inquiry. I mean, if this seems just impossibly abstract, by analogy, I just want to point out to you, maybe I can tie it down to something that we all know is so. We all know we have an optic blind spot. We all know that the optic nerve passes through the retina, and so there's a point in our visual fields where we're not getting any information. We've all probably had this demonstration done in class where you do a mark on a piece of paper and you play with it and you get the mark to disappear. Now, so it is true of you now. There's, as you look out across the room, there's somebody very likely missing a head, and you're not noticing it. It's falling in your blind spot. It is possible to be made to notice this. Most people don't notice it. Even those of us who know about it go for decades without noticing it. And yet it is there, available to be noticed. There is an analogous insight into the nature of consciousness that is just as on the surface as that. It tends to be harder to notice. I mean, it requires most people some training in meditation to notice it. But it is possible to notice that consciousness, that in you which is aware of your experience, does not feel like I. And there's a wealth of testimony on how this can change a person's experience of the world for the better. I mean, there's a kind of mystical well-being that is compatible with going into a cave for a year. I mean, going into a cave, for most of us, going into a cave for a year is synonymous with everything we don't want to happen to us. It separates us from everything we want out of life. It's rather interesting to point out that solitary confinement is considered a punishment even in a prison. And yet you have contemplatives who are willing and made really quite happy by running this experiment on themselves, going into a cave for vast amounts of time and practicing meditation. My argument to you is we have to bring this end of the human this end of the spectrum of human experience into the data of our worldview. We have to understand the possibilities of the plasticity of human experience. And our conception of human well-being has to include this. So in conclusion, I want to say that what we really need is a contemplative science. We need a way of talking about human well-being and the possibilities of human happiness that is as totally unconstrained by dogma as science is. We need to find a way of talking about the reality of death. The fact that we are all going to die is an astonishing situation. If you can just hold on long enough, You are going to witness the death of everyone you love. And this is everyone's experience. No one is going to escape this. If it is possible to be happy in this condition, if it is possible to be deeply happy in this condition, we need to understand this in terms that don't rely on divisive superstitions. If there's an important role for ritual in our lives, if we need to mark those occasions in every human life, birth and weddings and deaths, with profundity, if this is actually doing some serious work for us, we need to understand this in rational terms. We need to develop language that is not first century superstition. So one way to summarize what I've said to you is that I'm really arguing that every one of us is a scientist, in that every one of us is making a claim about the way the world is. Every one of us wants to understand reality. None of us want to be confused. None of us want to be mistaken about the situation we're in. But there are areas of intellectual honesty in our culture where science is good, and there are areas where we have a fundamental double standard, where certainty has been unlinked from evidence. But just as everyone is a scientist, everyone is also a mystic, in the sense that every one of us has been born into a circumstance where we are helplessly seeking happiness in a condition where experience is always changing. What you get, you lose. And we are all interested, whether we have time to think about it or not, we are all interested in finding just how happy, how much well-being can be enjoyed in this circumstance. And in designing a civilization that can promote it. So I'm just asking you to imagine what it would be like to have a society where our conversation about human well-being could proceed totally unconstrained by dogma, where really we could bring the full measure of our creativity to bear on questions of human happiness. And my argument is that to get there, to get from here to there, the end game for civilization is not mere tolerance of other people's irrationality. It is not political correctness. It is reason. Thank you very much.
I mean, the point you make is right at the beginning of the book, is that with all of these, the Greek gods and Roman gods and, the sun god and all of these things, that's now normal to dismiss all of that and say, well, of course those gods don't exist. But God, the Christian God, the Jewish God, well, there's got to be something there. Maybe it's all just one God and we all share it out between different religions, but there must be something there. Why do you think we're able to make that distinction between these archaic gods and the notion of God that we have now?
Because we, when you say we, you, I mean one.
Society
is brought up to believe in the God of the Jews and not in the God of the Greeks and the Vikings.
It's indoctrination then. It's just taught.
If Constantine, the Emperor Constantine, hadn't adopted Christianity as the official religion of the Roman Empire, children in Europe today would probably all worshipping Jupiter and Hera and Neptune.
And what do you think happens when we die?
Well, either we're cremated or we're buried, or we leave our body to science.
Do you fear it at all?
I fear the process of dying, depending upon how it happens. And I think that, unlike non-human animals who have the privilege of going to the vet and being put to sleep, we don't have that privilege. And so the likelihood is that our process of dying is not going to be very pleasant.
People often become more religious or more superstitious as they get older, though, don't they? Because they fear the Creator, or either being judged or that there's nothing.
I believe
that they just stop.
Could well be true. An Australian friend of mine said, Why are there so many old people in church cramming for the final?
And you've never found yourself wondering, have you ever had doubts that you may be wrong?
Not since I became an atheist, no. I mean, I may have doubts about lots of other things, but not about my individuality surviving the death of my brain. Of course not. That would be absurd.
Other eminent scientists, Stephen Hawking, Einstein, I suppose have had this notion that sort of, God might just be that bit of science that we haven't quite.
Oh, well, that's just a matter of terminology. Einstein and Hawking both used God language, but what they meant by that was that which we don't know, that which we don't understand. And they had a reverence. Einstein especially had a deep reverence for that which we don't understand. He unfortunately chose to couch it in God language, which has given a lot of people the mistaken impression that he was a believer in some kind of personal God, and he was very adamant, actually, that he was not. He did not believe in a personal God.
So you think that's a mistake, to sort of just go along with that notion? Give it that God-like language. I mean, Hawking's done the same, hasn't he?
Well, yes. I mean, he ended up famously the last words of A Brief History of Time, for then we should know the mind of God. But Hawking was definitely an atheist, so was Einstein. Einstein used God language much more often. He said things like, but he does not play dice, meaning but God does not play dice. And he said, what I really want to know is, did God have a choice in designing the universe? What he meant was, is there more than one way for a universe to be? And that's an interesting question. Could there be more than one kind of universe, or is there only one possible way? But he chose to put that in God language, a sort of poetic language, really, which has been widely misunderstood by people eager to misunderstand, I might add.
So if we were to actually sort of follow you, suppose the government said, OK, let's do what Richard Dawkins wants, what would it involve?
It would not involve dictatorial indoctrination in atheism. It would involve instead education in skeptical ways of thinking, in evidence-based thinking, teaching people how to think, not teaching people what to think, to coin that rather hackneyed phrase.
What does that mean? I mean, what is it that we're learning wrong, or how are we learning wrong?
We are learning wrong insofar as we tell children, this is your religion, this is what you believe, this is what you should believe. You should believe in Yahweh, you should believe in Apollo, you should believe in Thor, which throughout the ages children have been taught. That's not what you should teach children.
But most state schools today don't do that.
That's true. They don't do that, but there are quite a number of faith-based schools, faith schools so-called, which do that.
So you'd get rid of all of those?
I wouldn't get rid of the schools. I would get rid of the teaching children a particular faith. I think it's very important to teach children that religion exists. You need to teach children about different religions. You can't understand European history, indeed world history, unless you understand about religion, because so many of the world's wars have been fought on the basis of religious.
But should it be taught as something that's wrong?
It should be taught as something that happens, something that is historically there. The Bible should be taught as literature, because so much of English literature contains allusions to the Bible, and you can't get away from that. In The God Delusion, I think I've got about 3 pages of phrases which are part of English language, part of proverbial language, which come directly from the Bible. You can't understand Shakespeare, you can't understand so much of literature unless you're steeped in the Bible, and no doubt you can't understand Arabic literature unless you're steeped in the Quran. No, you can't understand Indian literature unless you're steeped in the Bhagavad Gita and so on. So yes, we need to study religious books as literature and as history.
Whether it is or not, in terms of the history.
Yes. Yeah. But not as science, and that's not as science, and not as labeling children with the religion of their parents. Not saying you are a Christian child or you are a Muslim child. It would make a hell of a difference in the Islamic world and in America, actually, where religion does still have a very powerful hold on people's minds because it has a powerful hold on child minds.
And it's particularly odd in America, isn't it? Because nobody really thinks Trump, for example, is a religious man.
No.
And yet he's moving much more in a faith-based direction, certainly on something like abortion.
That's right. Well, abortion is such a tremendous hot-button issue in America to a large section of the community, and so anybody who says he's against abortion only then has to pretend to be religious in order to get away with it. Religion does have an anomalously high hold on the American mind. It does stand out like a sore thumb when you compare it with other countries of similar economic status. There's a known relationship between religiosity and poverty and lack of social welfare. Those countries and those states within America that have more of a social safety net, health schemes and that kind of thing, they are the least religious. Religion tends to flourish in those countries where people feel insecure, either because of poverty or because of lack of social welfare provision. And America does stand out as being an anomaly on that graph.
And why do you think that is?
Very difficult to say. There have been various theories advanced. One is that in Western Europe, where there is an established religion, as in Britain and Scandinavia, religion becomes sort of boring. It becomes, you encounter it when you get married and when you die, but otherwise it's sort of not taken seriously. Whereas in America, religion is big business. You get these gigantic mega churches with evangelists using the slick Madison Avenue type techniques to sell their particular church as opposed to rival churches. So it's exciting. And you have these people waving their arms around and dancing in the aisles and things, and religion is a form of entertainment. And that's one theory. Another theory is that religion is that America, being an immigrant society, just about everybody is descended from immigrant parents, and not that long ago immigrant parents, all except for Native Americans. And one of the things that happens when you go across the Atlantic to a strange country is that you feel lonely, you feel isolated, you've left your roots behind, you've left your family behind. And so religion gives you, a church gives you a feeling of security, gives you a kind of substitute family. That's another theory that's been advanced.
When you think about what's going on in America, in parts of the Muslim world, when you look at the rise of Hindu nationalism in India, I mean, do you think you're losing this argument, your side?
Only temporarily. I mean, I think that there's a temporary reversal, as I said before. I mean, we're losing the argument in America because of Trump. Let's hope he doesn't get reelected. And Hindu nationalism, you're right. I mean, Gandhi and Nehru would be turning in their graves as what's going on in India. The rise of militant Islam as a form of pride, really, as a kind of nationalism, which I think is another great evil. I mean, the great wars of the 20th century, the First and Second World Wars, were nationalistic wars. So that's another ideology which is not evidence-based and has evil consequences.
But is it because secularism has failed these people? You know, rational thought hasn't got them anywhere?
I doubt that. As I say, I think it's a temporary thing. There's no doubt we're in a bad patch just at the moment.
Do you think we will get to a point where the idea of God will just be a sort of a curiosity?
We're moving in that direction over the long term, but we've got a long way to go, and I wouldn't like to hazard a guess as to when that will happen.
So do you think we will outgrow God?
It might take centuries, but yes.
So how do you think we will look back on religion if we do ever outgrow God?
The same kind of way we look back on when we believe that witches should be burned, that sort of thing. We'll look back on it as a dark period.
Richard Dawkins, thank you very much indeed. Thank you for sharing your ways to change the world.
In 1947, when the United Nations was trying to formulate its Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the American Anthropological Association stepped forward and said, well, you can't do this. To do this would be to merely be foisting one provincial notion of human rights on the rest of human culture, and any notion of human rights is the product of culture, and this is just an intellectually illegitimate thing to do. And this is what, this is 1947. This is essentially the best our social sciences could do with the crematory of Auschwitz still smoking. And yet it's been long been obvious that we need some to converge as a global civilization on how to behave and how to treat one another. We need some universal conception of right and wrong. So this, in addition to just not being true, I think the skepticism about moral truth actually has consequences that we really should worry about. So one thing to observe is that definitions matter, and we in science are always in the business of framing conversations, making definitions, and there's nothing about that process that gives us epistemological relativism, that nullifies truth claims. So in physics, we define physics as, loosely speaking, our best effort to understand the behavior of matter and energy in the universe. So it's defined with respect to the goal of understanding how matter is going to behave. Now, anyone else is free to define physics in some other way. I mean, a creationist physicist could come into the room and say, well, that's not my definition of physics. I want my physics, I want to simply match the book of Genesis. And we are free to exclude that person and say, well, you really don't belong at this conference. That's not physics as we are interested in it. You're using the word differently. You're not playing our language game. That gesture of exclusion, in no sense, the fact that the discourse of physics is not sufficient to silence that guy, that person can't be brought into the conversation, doesn't nullify physics as a domain of right and wrong answers. And yet, on the subject of morality, we seem to think that the possibility of differing opinions, the fact that someone can come forward and say, well, no, my morality has nothing to do with human flourishing, it has to do with following, Sharia law. The fact that that position can be articulated, I hear people like Jonathan and certainly many philosophers saying, well, that proves in some sense that there's no there. This is all made up. This is not, we can't, the fact that you can articulate a different position is a problem for the whole field. And I think it's not. So I think we have, obviously we have an intuitive physics, and much of our intuitive physics is wrong with respect to the goal of understanding how matter and energy are going to behave in the universe. What I want to say is that most people, most of us, most cultures have an intuitive morality. And much of our intuitive morality may be wrong with respect to the goal of maximizing human flourishing. Maximizing the well-being of conscious creatures generally. And so what I'm going to argue to you briefly is that the only sphere of legitimate moral concern, really, when you get into the details, is the well-being of conscious creatures.
Let's conclude the conversation we started the day before yesterday, which is the debate over the existence of God and the validity of religion. Today, I have numerous additional arguments that challenge the existence of God, and it's arguments that delve into philosophy, science, history, and human experiences, all in an effort to question the divine and religious frameworks built around the three main religions, or all other main religions in the world today. One of the most profound arguments against religion and the existence of God is the argument from incoherence. This argument suggests that the very concept of God, as described in many religious traditions, is inherently contradictory or at the end will be logically inconsistent. For instance, the idea of an all-powerful being. It raises questions about whether God can create a task that he himself cannot accomplish. I'm sure all of you have heard the question, can God create a stone so heavy that even he cannot lift it? If he can't create such a stone, that implies that even God's capabilities have their limitations. And if he can indeed create such a stone which is heavy that even he can't lift it, then that implies he isn't exactly all-powerful, since there is a limit to his strength. This paradox, often referred to as The omnipotence paradox undermines the coherence of the divine attributes that Christians, Muslims, and Jews ascribe to their God. Another compelling argument is the argument from the success of secular morality. Many people today believe that religion is the single source of moral values, but history and contemporary society demonstrates that morality can exist independently of religious belief. If anything, actually, some of the worst atrocities committed in human history were justified by the same three main religions that claim to be the harbingers of love and justice. Secular ethical systems, on the other hand, such as utilitarianism, deontology, and virtue ethics, provide robust frameworks for determining right and wrong without invoking divine authority. And even more important, secular societies often exhibit higher levels of social cohesion, empathy, and justice. Take countries like Sweden, Norway, and Denmark, for example, which have high levels of atheism and secularism. They consistently rank among the most peaceful, prosperous, and egalitarian nations around the world. If this man doesn't prove that morality is not dependent on religion, but is instead a product of human reasoning, empathy, and social evolution, I don't know what does. And if we are actually being 100% honest, not a single religious person watching this video would wish to move to a theocracy. Or am I wrong, man? Let's move on, man. The argument from the historical inaccuracies of religious texts is another powerful critique of religion. Many religious texts today, including the Bible, the Quran, and the Jewish religious books. What are they called, by the way? Anyway, these books contain historical claims that are contradictory to archaeological and scientific findings. For example, the biblical story of Noah's Ark describes a global flood that wiped out all life on earth, except those that were in the ark. However, geological evidence doesn't support the occurrences of such a flood, and the logistics of fitting all animal species in a single vessel ark are implausible, as I've mentioned multiple times in my videos. Similarly, the Quran contains scientific inaccuracies, such as the claim that sets in a muddy spring. Whatever that means, man. The point is, these discrepancies undermine the credibility of religious texts as sources of divine revelation and suggest they are products of human imagination rather than divine inspiration. Next, the argument from the failure of prayer. I slightly touched on this one in an earlier video. Many religious traditions today encourage believers to pray for guidance, healing, or intervention in their lives. However, empirical studies and common sense have constantly shown that prayer has no measurable effect on outcomes, ladies and gentlemen. And as I said in that earlier video, let's say that most people aren't believers or aren't good, and that's the reason God doesn't answer their prayers. That still doesn't answer anything, man. If God only answered the prayers of genuine preachers or prophets, innocents like children, and are genuinely good people that believe in Him, we'd be living in a paradise, ladies and gentlemen. Are religious people really trying to claim that no genuinely good believers prayed for the end of Corona before the pandemic claimed millions of lives around the world? Oh, what about the G-side unfolding before our eyes in the Middle East right now? Do religious people really believe that no true believers have prayed for the end of that as well, man? And you know what? Can't religious people point to a single documented pandemic that was eradicated by prayer like that without the intervention of scientists? Just a single one, man. We've had thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of pandemics in the last 2 centuries alone. So if Christians, Muslims, and other religious people really do believe in miracles and a God that answers prayers, let them point to at least a single one that was solved by prayer or a miracle from above or below, whichever the case. And I know what some of you are thinking, if your get out of jail card is, but God was working through these scientists to showcase His glory. My simple rebuttal is, was He also working through these scientists when they were disproving religious doctrines like the theory of creation and set the stage for the rise of atheism with the theory of evolution? Come on, man. And actually, don't you guys think that The harm caused by religious dogma should highlight the negative consequences of rigid belief systems, man. Throughout history, religious dogma has been used to justify oppression, violence, discrimination, the persecution of heretics in the past, the suppression of scientific inquiry still in the past, and not to mention the enforcement of patriarchal norms, all of which are a few examples of how religious dogma has done a good one in terms of harm in human societies. As you all know, even today, religious extremism continues to fuel conflict and division, from sectarian violence in the Middle East to the rise of far-right movements in the West, the rise of Donald Trump. So my point is, while it is true that religion can inspire compassion and altruism, it can also be a source of intolerance and extreme harm. This duality definitely should raise questions about the value of religious belief and its impact on human well-being. Finally, ladies and gentlemen, the argument for divine hiddenness further challenges the existence of God. If an all-powerful and all-loving God exists, why does he not reveal himself more clearly to humanity, you and I? Many people today struggle with doubt and skepticism and the absence of direct, unambiguous evidence of God's existence, which has led them to question his existence. I mean, as I've mentioned before, God did see it fit to provide sufficient proof to Thomas and Paul. So why won't he do it to skeptics today? Why were those two so special that God saw it fit to single-handedly spare them from eternal damnation? Or perhaps he isn't a fair and just God after all. Some theologians have argued that God remains hidden to preserve free will, but these are the same theologians who claim that God answers prayers and directly intervenes in the lives of those who believe in him. So which is which, ladies and gentlemen? As the philosopher J.L. Schellenberg has argued, the existence of non-resistant, non-believers, people who genuinely seek God but do not find him, is sufficient evidence against the existence of an all-loving God. Because if God desired to have a relationship with these people who genuinely are seeking for him, it seems reasonable to expect that he would make his presence known to them, at least in a way that is accessible anytime they desire. So yeah, to conclude, the arguments against religion and the existence of God are numerous and multifaceted, from the incoherent and divine attributes to the success of secular morality, the diversity of religious experiences, and the burden of suffering. All these critiques challenge the foundations of theistic beliefs. So yeah, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining me for today's video. It really and definitely was an exciting one. I hope you've enjoyed the arguments made in the video, as well as some of the points that I've made in this section of the video. Otherwise, thanks a lot, man, for joining me and watching the video to the end. I hope I'll see you all in the video that I'll upload the day after tomorrow, man. Thanks. Peace.